The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves through the narrow streets of the village, where Eleanor pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the bakery, her breath coming in short gasps. Her worn dress, carefully mended that morning, suddenly felt like rags against her skin. Through the gap between buildings she watched him descend from the gilded carriage, and her heart twisted with a pain so familiar it had become part of her. Stefan. After 7 years he had returned. But this was not the boy who had whispered promises under the oak tree, not the blacksmith's apprentice who had kissed her hands and sworn eternal devotion. This Stefan wore velvet and silk, his hair perfectly groomed, a gold chain glinting at his throat. Beside him stood a woman of porcelain beauty, her gown worth more than Elena's family would earn in 10 lifetimes. Elena's fingers dug into the rough stone. She had known he would return someday. The village had buzzed with rumors for weeks. Stefan Volkov, who had left as a penniless orphan, had made his fortune in the capital. He had become a merchant of influence, a man who dined with nobles. And now he had come back to flaunt his success, to show the village that had pitied him just how far he had risen. The crowd gathered in the square, faces bright with curiosity and envy. Elena's mother stood among them, her expression carefully neutral. But Elena knew the shame that burned beneath. Everyone remembered. Everyone knew that Elena had waited, that she had refused other suitors, that she had believed in promises made by candlelight. She should leave. She should slip away through the alley and return to the small cottage on the edge of the village, where her father's cough grew worse each day and her younger brother needed feeding. But her feet would not move. Some terrible part of her needed to see, needed to witness the final destruction of the girl she had once been. Stefan's laugh rang across the square, confident and bright. He greeted the village elders with the easy charm of a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere. His fiancée clung to his arm, delicate and ethereal, everything Elena was not. The woman's skin had never known hard labor, her hands had never been roughened by lye soap and endless scrubbing. Then Stefan's eyes found her. For one breath, two. Their gazes locked across the distance. Eleanor saw the recognition flicker in his face, saw something that might have been regret or might have been satisfaction. He leaned toward his fiancée and whispered something. The woman's eyes turned to Eleanor, and her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. Eleanor's stomach churned. She pushed away from the wall, her decision made in an instant. She could not stand here and be pitied. She could not endure the whispered conversations, the knowing looks, the sympathetic pats on her shoulder from women who would thank God they were not her. Her feet carried her away from the square, through the winding streets, past the last houses where firelight glowed in windows. The forest loomed ahead, dark and forbidding in the fading light. Rational thought screamed at her to stop, to turn back, but shame drove her forward like a whip. The path grew steeper, rockier. Thorns caught at her skirt. The temperature dropped with each step she climbed, until her breath misted before her face. She had lived her entire life in the shadow of these mountains, had heard the stories since childhood, the old castle that crowned the highest peak, the creature that dwelled within, Count Dracula, the immortal nightmare, the vampire lord who had haunted Transylvania for centuries. Children were taught never to venture up this path. Animals avoided it. Even the bravest hunters refused to track game beyond a certain point. The castle was cursed ground, a place where the living did not tread unless they wished to join the dead. But Elena climbed higher. What did she have to lose? Her future had been a lie, her hopes ashes. The pain in her chest had become unbearable, and the thought of facing tomorrow and all the tomorrows after filled her with a weariness deeper than exhaustion. The trees thinned. The path became steps carved into the mountain itself, ancient and worn smooth by forgotten feet. Above her, the castle emerged from the mist like a great beast of stone and shadow. Its towers clawed at the darkening sky. Gargoyles leered from the battlements. No light shone in any window. Elena stopped at the massive gate, her courage finally faltering. The iron was black with age, decorated with twisted shapes that might have been vines or might have been something more sinister. A cold wind moaned through the bars, carrying a scent of old stone and older death. What was she doing? Had grief stolen her reason entirely? She raised a trembling hand to the gate, but before she could touch it, the iron swung open with a sound like a long exhalation. The courtyard beyond lay empty, paved with stones that gleamed wetly though no rain had fallen. Eleanor stepped through. The gate closed behind her with a decisive clang that made her jump. The courtyard was vast, silent except for the wind. Dead ivy crawled up the walls. A fountain stood at the center, its basin dry, its statue weathered beyond recognition. The castle doors stood open. A faint light flickered within, distant and cold. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything except walk toward that light. But she walked, one foot before the other, across the courtyard, up the worn steps, through the doorway that gaped like a mouth. The entrance hall stretched before her, impossibly vast. Pillars rose into shadow. Ancient tapestries hung on the walls, their images faded but suggesting scenes of battle and blood. Candles burned in iron sconces. Though she had seen no one to light them, her footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Each sound seemed magnified, thrown back at her from a dozen directions. The air tasted of dust and time, and something underneath, something that made her instincts scream warnings her conscious mind tried to ignore. A staircase swept upward to her left. Corridors branched in 3 directions ahead. She had no map, no guide, no plan. She had only taken 5 steps into the hall when the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Welcome, little mouse." I wondered when someone would finally accept my invitation. Elena spun in a circle, her back pressing against a pillar. The voice was male, rich and cultured, with an accent that spoke of centuries rather than decades. It held amusement and curiosity, and something that might have been hunger. "You climb my mountain uninvited, enter my home unbidden, and now you cower in my hall. Tell me, child, are you brave or merely foolish?" Elena's voice came out as a whisper. "I seek the Count." Laughter rolled through the hall, soft and dark as velvet. "How delightful. Most who come here are lost or fleeing. You are the first in many years to seek me deliberately." The voice paused, and she felt something like a tension focus on her, sharp as a blade. "What drives a mortal girl to the monster's door? What desperation brings you to bargain with the damned?" Elena lifted her chin, forcing steel into her spine. "I need help. I have nowhere else to turn." The shadows at the far end of the hall moved. At first she thought it was a trick of the candlelight, but then the darkness took shape and form. A man stepped forward, though man seemed too simple a word for what approached her. He was tall, his movements fluid as water. His clothing was black, perfectly tailored, belonging to no particular era and every era at once. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, framing a face of such severe beauty it seemed carved rather than born. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They burned with an inner light, crimson as fresh blood, ancient as stone. Count Dracula stopped 10 paces from her. His gaze traveled over her slowly, missing nothing. The worn dress, the work-roughened hands, the tear-stained face, the defiant tilt of her chin despite her terror. "You are frightened," he observed. "Your heart beats like a trapped bird. Yet you stand your ground. Interesting." He circled her slowly, and Elena forced herself not to turn with him, not to show her back. "Most who see me flee or faint. You do neither." Elena's voice shook but held. "I did not climb your mountain to show weakness." "No?" He completed his circle, standing before her again. "Then why did you climb it?" The words stuck in her throat. Now that she stood here, faced with this creature of legend and nightmare, her plan seemed absurd, laughable, the desperate fantasy of a broken heart. But she had come too far to turn back. She had nothing left to lose. "I need you to pretend something," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Just for 5 minutes. I need you to come to the village and pretend to be my lover." Silence filled the hall. Count Dracula stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile curved his lips. It was not a kind smile. It showed teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "Your lover," he repeated softly. "You want me, the monster of the Carpathians, the creature mothers use to frighten children into obedience, to play at being your beloved?" His eyes narrowed. "Tell me why." Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "A man returned to my village today. He was once promised to me. He left 7 years ago with nothing and swore he would return to marry me. I waited. I refused others. I believed him. And now he has returned wealthy, Dracula said, with another woman on his arm. Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice. The vampire tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. And you wish to salvage your pride. You want him to believe you have not spent 7 years pining for him like a faithful dog. You want him to see you have moved on to something grander, more dangerous, more worthy of envy and fear. His smile widened. How deliciously petty. How perfectly human. Elena's cheeks burned. When you say it like that, it sounds foolish. It is foolish. It is also understandable. Dracula moved closer, and she smelled something like old books and cold as stone, and underneath it all, a scent of iron that might have been blood. But what makes you think I would agree to this charade? I can pay you, Elena said desperately. Not with money. I have none. But I can work. I can clean your castle, cook your meals, anything you need. I do not eat food, child. I have no need of housekeeping. This castle has stood empty for centuries. It will stand empty for centuries more. Then what do you want? Elena's voice rose, cracking with frustration and despair. Everyone wants something. Name your price. Dracula was silent for a long moment. His eyes burned into hers, and she felt as though he was reading every secret she had ever kept, every fear she had ever hidden. 5 minutes, he said finally. That is what you ask. 5 minutes of pretense in exchange for what? His hand rose, one pale finger extended. I could take your blood. I could drain you here and now and add your bones to the thousands that litter my crypts. Elena swallowed hard but did not look away. Then why haven't you? Because I am curious. It has been a very long time since someone amused me. The vampire stepped back, his hands clasped behind him. Very well, little mouse. I will agree to your bargain. I will descend to your village. I will play the role of your devoted lover. I will make your faithless Stefan choke on his regret. Relief flooded through Elena, so intense it made her dizzy. Thank you, I... But Dracula continued, his voice sharp as a blade. You will owe me a debt. Not your blood, not your service. Something more interesting. What? Elena whispered. I will decide later. When the game has played out and I have had time to consider what price would be most fitting. His smile was all predator now. Do you agree to these terms? Will you bind yourself to an unknown debt, owed to a monster for the sake of 5 minutes of pride? Elena hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to accept her humiliation rather than bargain with the devil. But the image of Stefan's face rose in her mind, the casual dismissal in his eyes, the way he had looked through her as though she were nothing. I agree, she said. Dracula's eyes flared brighter. Then it is done, a bargain sealed, a debt incurred. He extended his hand, palm up. Come, little mouse. Let us prepare you for your performance. If I am to play the besotted lover, you must look the part of one who has captured my attention. That dress will not do. Helena stared at his hand, pale and perfect as marble. Slowly she placed her roughened palm in his. His fingers closed around hers, cold as winter stone, strong as iron. He pulled her forward, deeper into the castle, into the shadows that had been his home for longer than her village had existed. And as she walked beside the creature of nightmare, Eleanor wondered if pride was worth the price she had just agreed to pay, but it was too late for second thoughts. The bargain was struck. The game would play out. And tomorrow, Stefan would see her on the arm of Count Dracula himself. Tomorrow, her faithless love would learn that some rejections carry consequences he could never have imagined. The Count led her through corridors that seemed to shift and change, past rooms filled with treasures and dust, up staircases that defied reason. Finally, they emerged into a chamber that took her breath away. It was vast, dominated by a bed that could have held 10 people. Wardrobes lined the walls. A mirror taller than Elena stood in one corner, its silver surface spotted with age. Candles burst to life as they entered, filling the room with golden light. This was my wife's chamber, Dracula said, his voice neutral. Long ago, when such things mattered. His hand released hers. The wardrobes contain clothing. Find something suitable. We leave at dawn. Elena turned to him, questions crowding her tongue. But he was already moving toward the door. his shape blending with the shadows. "Sleep, little mouse. Tomorrow we shall give your village a tale they will whisper about for generations." Then he was gone, and Elena stood alone in the dead woman's chamber, surrounded by the possessions of someone who had once been loved by a monster. She moved to the nearest wardrobe, her hands trembling as she opened the door. Inside hung gowns of such beauty they seemed woven from dreams and moonlight. Elena pulled out a dress of deep crimson, the color of wine or blood. The fabric felt like water between her fingers. She had never worn anything so fine. She had never imagined she would. She laid the dress carefully on the bed and moved to the window. Outside, the moon hung full and silver over the mountains. Below, somewhere in the darkness, her village slept. In one of those houses, Stefan lay beside his perfect fiancée, content in his success, secure in his triumph. Tomorrow that would change. Tomorrow he would see what he had thrown away. And whatever price Count Dracula demanded for this favor, whatever debt she had incurred, Elena told herself it would be worth it. She told herself that, but standing in the darkness of the vampire's castle, wearing the dead wife's dress, she was no longer certain she believed it. The night deepened. The candles burned lower. And in the shadows of the ancient castle, Count Dracula stood before his own mirror, seeing nothing reflected back, and wondered why he had agreed to this foolish game. He had not concerned himself with human affairs for decades. He had not descended to the valley and longer still. The mortals feared him, avoided him, left offerings at the base of his mountain, and prayed he would remain where he belonged. But something in the girl's eyes had caught his attention, some defiance mixed with desperation, some willingness to bargain with damnation for the sake of wounded pride. It reminded him of someone, though the memory was old and faded like the tapestries in his hall. It reminded him of himself, centuries ago, when he had still been human enough to care about such things. 5 minutes, he murmured to his absent reflection. What harm could come from 5 minutes of pretense? But he had lived long enough to know that the smallest lies often carried the greatest consequences. And as he turned from the mirror, and the night embraced him, Count Dracula smiled into the darkness, because he was very much looking forward to what tomorrow would bring. The game had begun, and games, he had learned over his long existence, were so much more interesting when the players did not yet know all the rules. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the tall windows, which should have been impossible. She sat up with a gasp, disoriented, her heart racing. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, could not understand why she lay in a bed softer than clouds, wrapped in sheets of silk that whispered against her skin. Then memory flooded back. The castle, the vampire, the bargain. She threw back the covers and saw she still wore her worn dress from yesterday. The crimson gown she had laid on the bed was gone. In its place sat a complete ensemble, arranged with careful precision. The dress was there, but also undergarments of fine linen, stockings of silk, shoes of soft leather that looked as though they would fit her perfectly. Beside them lay a velvet cloak lined with fur, and jewelry that gleamed even in the morning light. Elena approached the display slowly, half expecting it to vanish like a dream. But the fabric remained solid under her fingers, real and impossibly luxurious. She had never owned anything half so fine. The shoes alone were worth more than her family's cottage. A sound made her turn. The chamber door stood open, though she had not heard it move. Beyond lay the corridor, empty and silent. But on a small table just inside the room sat a tray with bread, cheese, fruit, and a pitcher of what smelled like wine. Steam rose from a cup of tea. Elena stared at the food. "I do not eat food, child." The Count's words from last night echoed in her mind. Yet someone had brought this meal. Someone had laid out these clothes. Someone moved through this castle besides the master. Or perhaps the castle itself served him, animated by whatever dark power sustained the vampire's existence. Elena forced herself to eat, though her stomach churned with nerves. The bread was fresh, still warm. The cheese was rich and creamy. The fruit tasted of summer despite the autumn chill. It was the finest meal she had eaten in years, maybe ever, and it turned to ash in her mouth because of what it represented. She was in a monster's castle, wearing a dead woman's clothes, preparing to deceive her entire village with a creature of nightmare. What had seemed like desperate courage last night now felt like the worst kind of foolishness. But she had made her choice. She had struck her bargain, and Elena had never been one to abandon a path once she had set her feet upon it. She washed with water from a basin that appeared to have been filled recently, though again she had heard no one enter. Then she began the process of dressing. The undergarments fit perfectly, as though made for her body. The stockings slid on like a second skin. The dress settled over her shoulders with a weight that felt both strange and right, and when she fastened the last button, she turned to face the tall mirror. The woman who looked back at her was a stranger. The crimson dress transformed her from a peasant girl into someone who could stand in any noble house without shame. The color brought out the warmth in her skin, the darkness of her hair. The cut emphasized a figure she had always hidden under loose, practical clothing. She looked older, more confident, more dangerous. She looked like someone who might catch the attention of an immortal predator. Elena picked up the jewelry with trembling fingers. A necklace of dark garnets that glowed like drops of blood. Earrings that caught the light and threw it back in crimson sparks. She put them on, and the transformation completed. The girl who had scrubbed floors and hauled water had vanished entirely. The cloak settled around her shoulders like an embrace. The shoes fit as though crafted for her feet alone. Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself, then walked to the chamber door. The corridor beyond stretched in both directions, lined with doors and shadows. She had no memory of how they had arrived at this room last night. Everything after entering the castle had become a blur of impressions and fear. "You look presentable." Elena spun toward the voice. Count Dracula stood behind her, though she had not heard his approach, had not sensed his presence. In the daylight streaming through the windows, he should have been destroyed, burned to ash by the sun that was said to be fatal to his kind. Instead, he stood bathed in golden light, completely unharmed, regarding her with those burning eyes. "The sun," she whispered. "How are you not—" "Ah," he said softly, stepping closer. "You believe the stories. Sunlight turns us to dust. Garlic repels us. Crosses burn our flesh." He smiled, and it was not kind. Some legends are true. Others are convenient fabrications, spread by my kind to make mortals feel safer. The sun does not harm me, child. I have walked in daylight for centuries. It is one of the privileges of age and power. Elena's throat tightened. Then the stories. What else is false? Many things. Some things. Does it matter? He gestured down the corridor. "Come, we have a performance to prepare, and I find myself looking forward to it more than I expected." He led her through the castle, and in the daylight it looked different, still ancient, still forbidding, but somehow less oppressive. She saw the beauty beneath the decay, the intricate carvings on the walls, the faded magnificence of the tapestries, the architectural genius that had raised these stones into something that defied time itself. They descended a grand staircase and emerged into the entrance hall where she had first encountered him. In daylight it was vast beyond belief, a space that could have held her entire village. The floor was polished stone, inlaid with patterns that might have been decorative or might have been occult symbols. "Before we go," Dracula said, stopping in the center of the hall, "we must establish the rules of our charade." Elena turned to face him, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. "You will be Elena Radovic," the vampire continued, "but elevated. I will introduce you as my companion, the woman who has captured my interest. You will conduct yourself with confidence and grace. You will not cower. You will not apologize for your position. You will act as though it is the most natural thing in the world that you should be at my side." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" His eyes bored into hers. "Because the moment you show weakness, the moment you appear uncertain or afraid, the illusion shatters. Your Stefan must believe this is real. The entire village must believe it. They must look at you and think that somehow, impossibly, you have become something more than they ever imagined you could be." "I can do that," Elena said, lifting her chin. "I will do that." "Good." Dracula began to circle her again, but this time it felt different, evaluative rather than predatory. "You will walk beside me, not behind. When we stop, you will stand close, within arm's reach. If I speak to you, you will respond naturally, not with the deference of a servant. We must appear intimate, comfortable with each other, as though we have shared many private moments. Elena's cheeks heated, but she nodded. And when your Stefan approaches, as he inevitably will, because men like him cannot resist confronting what they have discarded, you will let me handle him. Your role is simply to look content, to look as though you have found something worth having. He stopped in front of her again, so close she could have touched him if she dared. Then he reached out and took her hand, the same cold grip from last night. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture that might have been tender if it had come from anyone else. "Are you ready, little mouse?" Elena met his burning gaze and did not look away. "I am ready. Then let us descend. Let us give your village a morning they will never forget." He led her from the castle, through the courtyard, to the great gates that swung open at their approach. The mountain path stretched below them, winding down through the forest toward the distant rooftops of the village. In daylight, the descent looked less forbidding, almost beautiful in the autumn colors that painted the trees. They walked side by side, Elena's hand resting in the crook of his arm. His pace was measured to match hers, unhurried, as though they had all the time in the world. The morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from the village below. "Tell me about him," Dracula said as they walked. "Your faithless Stefan. What manner of man is he?" Elena hesitated, old pain rising in her throat. "He was kind once, or I thought he was. He worked in the smithy with his uncle. His parents died when he was young. He had nothing, but he had dreams. He wanted to make something of himself." "Noble aspirations," the vampire observed dryly. "He used to bring me flowers," Elena continued, the words spilling out now. "Wildflowers from the meadow beyond the mill. He said I was beautiful. He said he would love me forever." She laughed, bitter. "Forever lasted 3 years before he left for the capital. He said he would return for me. He said he just needed to make his fortune first, to have something to offer my father. But he did not return. Not for 7 years. And when he finally did, he brought someone else. Someone better. Someone who never had to wonder if she would eat that day, or if the last of the grain would have to stretch another week." Dracula was silent for several paces. Then he said, in a voice that held something almost like understanding, "You blame yourself. You think if you had been more, he would have kept his promises." Elena's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. "Isn't that true? If I had been prettier, more refined, more worthy, maybe he would have disappointed you regardless," Dracula interrupted sharply. "Men like your Stefan make promises with their mouths that their hearts never intend to keep. They speak of forever while planning their exit. They take what you offer freely and resent you for the very generosity that should have bound them to you. You sound as though you know something of this," Elena said quietly. "I have lived a very long time. I have seen every variation of human betrayal." His grip on her arm tightened slightly. "What your Stefan did was not a reflection of your worth. It was a revelation of his character. He is the type who will always want more than what he has, who will always believe the grass is greener elsewhere, who will chase satisfaction and never find it because the emptiness is inside him." The certainty in his voice surprised her. She glanced at him, this creature of legend and darkness, and saw something in his expression that looked almost like anger on her behalf. They emerged from the forest onto the lower slopes where farms spread across the valley. A few early workers in the fields looked up, saw them and froze. Elena watched the recognition spread across their faces, the horror, the disbelief. One man dropped his scythe and fled toward the village, shouting warnings. "It begins," Dracula murmured. "Smile, little mouse. Let them see you are unafraid." Elena forced her lips to curve upward. She straightened her spine and lifted her head, channeling every bit of the confidence the crimson dress had given her. Let them stare. Let them whisper. For once in her life, she would be the subject of gossip for something other than pity. They walked through the fields, past workers who scrambled out of their path. The village gates stood open ahead, and already people were gathering, drawn by the shouts of the field worker who had run ahead. Elena could see the crowd forming in the square, faces turned toward the approaching figures. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her palms were damp with sweat, but she kept her chin high, and her step steady, matching the vampire's unhurried pace. They passed beneath the gates. The crowd parted before them like water before the prow of a ship. Absolute silence had fallen over the square. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stared, mouths open, faces white with terror and shock. Eleanor scanned the crowd, searching. There, near the fountain, stood Stefan with his fiancée on his arm. He had gone completely still, his face drained of color. His eyes locked on Elena with an expression she could not read. Their eyes met across the square. Elena felt Dracula shift beside her, felt his attention focus on Stefan with predatory precision. "Ah," the vampire said softly, for her ears alone. "Is that him? The man who broke your heart?" "Yes," Elena whispered. "Then let us begin." Dracula led her directly towards Stefan, crossing the square with measured steps. The crowd fell back before them, people pressing against walls and doorways to clear a path. Mothers pulled children behind their skirts. Men gripped tools that would be useless against what approached. They stopped 3 paces from Stefan and his fiancée. Up close, Elena could see her former love had gone rigid with shock. His fiancée clutched his arm, her porcelain face showing the first cracks of fear. "Good morning," Dracula said pleasantly, his voice carrying across the silent square. "What a lovely day for a walk, is it not? Eleanor and I so rarely descend from our home, but she insisted we should visit her village. She speaks of it so fondly." The word "our" rang through the square like a bell. Our home. As though Elena lived in the castle, as though she belonged there. Stefan's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Finally he managed, "Eleanor, what is this?" Eleanor felt Dracula's hand move to the small of her back, a gesture of casual possession that made her skin prickle. She forced herself to smile, to look at Stefan with the expression of someone who has moved far beyond old pain. "Stefan," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I heard you had returned. Congratulations on your engagement." The words tasted like poison, but she delivered them sweetly. Stefan's eyes traveled from her face to her dress to the vampire at her side and back again. "Elena," he repeated, as though saying her name could make sense of what he was seeing. You cannot be serious. This is..." "He is. Count Dracula," the vampire supplied helpfully. "And yes, I am exactly what you think I am." He smiled, showing just enough teeth to confirm the worst fears. "Eleanor and I have become quite close over these past months. She has proven to be exceptional company. Months." The lie was bold, claiming a history that did not exist. But who would contradict the vampire? Who would dare call him a liar? Stefan's fiancée made a small sound of distress. "Stefan," she whispered, "we should go, please, we should..." But Stefan was not listening to her. He was staring at Elena with something like anguish in his eyes. "Elena, you cannot. This is madness. He is a monster. He will destroy you, will I?" Dracula's voice went soft and dangerous. "That is a bold claim, mortal. Perhaps you should concern yourself with your own affairs and leave Elena's choices to her." Stefan's face flushed with anger or shame or both. "What choices? You have bewitched her, enslaved her, forced her to..." "No one has forced me to do anything," Elena interrupted, her own anger rising. "This is my choice, Stefan, mine alone, but why?" Stefan stepped forward, his fiancée forgotten, reaching toward Elena as though he could pull her back from a precipice. "Why would you do this? 7 years ago you were a good girl, a decent girl, and now you..." "Now I what?" Elena demanded. "Now I have found something better than waiting for promises that will never be kept. Now I have chosen a companion who at least has the honesty to be what he is." The words landed like blows. Stefan recoiled as though she had struck him. Around them, the villagers whispered among themselves, shock mixing with horrified fascination. Dracula's hand pressed more firmly against Elena's back, a reminder of his presence, a silent approval of her performance. "She is extraordinary, is she not?" the vampire said to Stefan. "I confess, I was surprised to find someone of her quality in such a small village. But life is full of unexpected treasures." Stefan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You have no right," he said, his voice breaking. "No right to take her from..." "From you?" Dracula inquired mildly. But you left her, did you not? You departed for your fortune and your new life, and you left her behind without a second thought. His eyes burned brighter. You have no claim on her. You surrendered that right when you chose ambition over devotion. I was coming back, Stefan insisted desperately. I always planned to come back. With another woman, Elena said quietly. You came back engaged to someone else. Did you think I would wait forever? Did you think my life would simply pause until you deigned to remember me? Tears stood in Stefan's eyes. I thought you understood. I thought you knew I needed time to build something worthy of you, and I thought you would keep your promises. Elena's voice hardened. We were both wrong. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Stefan stood frozen, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. His fiancée had begun to cry silently, understanding perhaps that she had never really had his heart. Dracula broke the silence with a laugh that held no humor. Well, this has been enlightening, but Elena and I have other matters to attend. He turned Elena gently, preparing to guide her away. Enjoy your wedding, Stefan Volkov. I am certain you and your bride will be very happy together. They had taken 3 steps when Stefan's voice rang out behind them. Wait. Elena felt Dracula pause. She turned to see Stefan moving toward them, his face desperate. Elena, please. Stefan's voice shook. If there is anything left between us, any memory of what we had, please do not do this. Please do not throw your life away on a creature who cannot love you, who will only destroy you in the end. Elena looked at him, at this man she had loved so desperately, had waited for so faithfully, had believed in so completely. She looked at his fine clothes and his anguished face, and his perfect fiancée standing forgotten behind him, and she felt nothing but a distant, cold satisfaction. Love, she said softly. You want to speak to me of love, Stefan? You who loved me so much you forgot me for 7 years? She shook her head. Whatever we had died long ago. You killed it when you stopped writing, when you stopped caring, when you chose everything else over me. I never stopped caring, Stefan said brokenly, but you stopped choosing me. Elena turned away from him, toward the vampire at her side. And that is the same thing. Dracula's hand found hers, cold fingers interlacing with her warm ones. Shall we go, my dear? He asked gently, playing his role perfectly. I believe we have lingered here long enough. Yes, Elena said, not looking back at Stefan. Let us go home. They walked away across the square. Behind them, Stefan stood motionless, his dreams and regrets reflected in his face. His fiancée approached him hesitantly, touching his arm, but he did not seem to notice her. He stared after Elena until she and the vampire passed through the village gates and began the climb back toward the mountain. Only when they were alone on the path, out of sight of the village, did Elena allow her composure to crack. Her legs trembled. Her breath came in gasps. The emotions she had held back during the confrontation threatened to overwhelm her. Dracula stopped and turned to face her. You did well, he said simply. Did I? Elena laughed, a sound on the edge of hysteria. I feel like I might shatter into pieces. But you did not shatter. Not there, not when it mattered. His eyes studied her face. You were strong when you needed to be. That is no small thing. Elena looked up at him, this creature who had helped her salvage something from the wreckage of her pride. Thank you, she said quietly, for doing this, for helping me. It was 5 minutes, as agreed. Dracula released her hand and stepped back. The bargain is fulfilled. You may return to your village now if you wish. Your Stefan has seen you on the arm of a monster. Your dignity is preserved. Our transaction is complete. Elena blinked, suddenly aware that he was dismissing her. She should be relieved. She should be grateful to escape with her life. But instead, she felt a strange emptiness at the thought of returning to her cottage, to her ordinary life, to the girl she had been before climbing this mountain. What happens now? She asked. Now. Dracula turned away from her, gazing up at the castle that loomed above them. Now you live your life, little mouse. You face the consequences of our little performance. The village will not soon forget what they saw today. Some will fear you. Some will pity you. Some will believe you truly are my companion. He glanced back at her over his shoulder. And you will have to decide what story you wish them to believe. And the debt? Elena asked quietly. You said I would owe you something, that you would decide the price later. Ah, yes, the debt. Dracula smiled faintly. I have decided what I want. Elena's heart seized in her chest. What is it? Come back tomorrow night, he said. Come to the castle and share dinner with me. Let us say at sunset. That is all? Elena could not keep the surprise from her voice. You want me to eat dinner with you? I want conversation, company. It has been a very long time since I had a guest who was not screaming or begging for mercy. His expression was unreadable. Consider it payment for services rendered, one dinner, then we are even. Elena hesitated, every instinct warning her against returning to the vampire's lair. But a bargain was a bargain, and she had agreed to his terms. One dinner, she repeated, at sunset tomorrow. Excellent. Dracula inclined his head, a gesture that might have been a bow in another context. Until then, Elena Radovich, try not to let the villagers burn you as a witch. He turned and walked up the path, his form growing distant and indistinct. Within moments he had disappeared entirely, leaving Elena alone on the mountain with the weight of a crimson dress and the memory of Stefan's broken face. She stood there for a long time, neither climbing toward the castle nor descending to the village. The morning sun warmed her skin, birds sang in the trees, everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, before she had made her desperate bargain with darkness. But nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. Finally, slowly, Elena began the long walk down to the village, to face whatever awaited her there. And as she walked, she found herself not dreading tomorrow night's dinner, but strangely, inexplicably looking forward to it. Behind her, high in his castle, Count Dracula stood at a window and watched her descend. A smile played at his lips. The game had gone exactly as planned. Better than planned, actually. The girl had surprised him with her steel, her fire, her refusal to break under pressure. Yes, he thought, tomorrow's dinner would be interesting indeed. Very interesting. The day passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. Elena returned to her cottage on the edge of the village to find her mother waiting on the doorstep, her face pale with fear and confusion. Her father sat inside, coughing into a rag, too ill to rise, but watching Elena with eyes that held 1,000 questions. Her younger brother Andrei stood behind their mother, his 12-year-old face caught between terror and awe. "Elena," he whispered, "is it true? Did you really walk with the Count?" Elena had no words to explain what she had done, what bargain she had struck. How could she tell them the truth? That she had climbed the mountain in despair, that she had traded an unknown debt for 5 minutes of dignity, that she had played a dangerous game with a creature who could end her life with a thought. Instead, she told them a version of the truth, that Count Dracula had shown her unexpected kindness, that he had agreed to help her face Stefan, that nothing terrible had happened. She did not tell them about the debt, about tomorrow's dinner, about the strange pull she felt toward the darkness she should be fleeing. Her mother wept with relief and horror in equal measure. Her father's cough worsened, and Elena suspected the shock had taken a toll on his already failing health. Andrei peppered her with questions about the castle, about the vampire, about whether Elena had seen treasure or magic or the bones of the dead. Elena answered what she could and deflected the rest. She changed out of the crimson dress, carefully folding it and hiding it beneath her bed. The garnet jewelry she tucked into a small wooden box that had belonged to her grandmother. She washed her face and hands, scrubbing away the fine soap and perfume that had clung to her skin, trying to return to being the girl she had been before. But that girl no longer existed. She had died somewhere on that mountain path, and whoever had returned in her place did not quite fit into the narrow confines of this cottage anymore. By evening, the entire village knew. People came to the door, some curious, some concerned, some openly hostile. The priest arrived shortly after sunset, Father Constantine, an elderly man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he gripped his wooden cross. He asked if Elena had been coerced, if she had been placed under a spell, if the vampire had drunk her blood or claimed her soul. Elena assured him she was fine, that she was unchanged, that nothing had happened beyond what the village had witnessed. The priest studied her face for a long time, then blessed her, and urged her to pray for protection. After he left, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Her mind kept returning to the castle, to the vampire's burning eyes, to the cold grip of his hand in hers. She replayed every moment of their encounter in the village square, Stefan's broken expression, the crowd's horrified silence, the way Dracula had played his role with such perfect, terrifying conviction. And she thought about tomorrow, about the debt she owed, about the dinner she had promised to attend. She should not go. Every rational part of her screamed that returning to the castle was madness. One dinner could become 2, could become a dozen, could become a trap from which she would never escape. The vampire had been civil, even helpful, but he was still a predator, still a monster, still capable of horrors beyond her imagination. But she had given her word, and Elena, whatever else she might be, kept her promises. She would not become like Stefan, abandoning her commitments when they became inconvenient. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena helped her mother with the washing, fed her father broth, listened to Andrei's excited speculation about vampire lore. She avoided the village center, but she could not avoid the stairs when she went to the well for water. Women whispered behind their hands. Men watched her with suspicion or something darker. The blacksmith's wife, a large woman named Magda, who had never liked Elena, blocked her path on the way back from the well. So she said loudly enough for others to hear, "You think you are too good for honest men now? You prefer the company of demons." Elena met her gaze steadily. "I prefer the company of those who keep their promises." Magda's face reddened. "You are a fool and a sinner. You will bring a curse down on all of us." She spat at Elena's feet. Monster's whore, the words should have hurt. A week ago they would have destroyed her. But Elena felt strangely detached, as though Magda's venom could not touch her anymore. She simply stepped around the woman and continued home, ignoring the muttered prayers and insults that followed her. When the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Elena retrieved the crimson dress from beneath her bed. Her mother saw her preparations and began to cry again, begging Elena not to return to that terrible place. But Elena's mind was made. She owed a debt, she would pay it. She dressed carefully, fastened the garnet jewelry around her throat and in her ears, wrapped the velvet cloak around her shoulders. When she looked in the small cracked mirror that hung on the cottage wall, she barely recognized herself. The woman who gazed back looked like someone from a story, someone who belonged in a different world entirely. Andrei watched her with wide eyes. "Will you come back?" he asked quietly. Elena knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. "I will," she promised. "I will always come back." She kissed her father's fevered forehead, embraced her weeping mother, and stepped out into the gathering dusk. The path to the mountain was familiar now, though no less forbidding. She walked through the village as evening fell, past houses where candles were being lit, past the church where Father Constantin knelt in prayer before the altar. At the edge of the village, she encountered one final obstacle. Stefan stepped out from behind a tree blocking her path. His face looked haggard, as though he had not slept. His fine clothes were rumpled. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse, "please do not do this." Elena stopped but did not approach him. "Stefan, you should be with your fiancé." She left. He laughed bitterly. This morning she returned to the capital. She said she would not marry a man whose heart belonged to another woman. She said she deserved better than to be second choice. "Good for her," Elena said quietly. "She does deserve better." Stefan flinched. "Elena, please. I know I hurt you. I know I broke my promises. But this is not the answer." He gestured toward the mountain. "He is using you. Whatever he told you, whatever he promised you, it is a lie. Vampires do not care for humans. They see us as food, as toys, as nothing more than cattle to be used and discarded." "And what did you see me as, Stefan?" Elena asked. "When you left for the capital with promises on your lips, what was I to you? When you returned 7 years later with another woman, having never sent word, never written, never returned, what was I then?" Stefan had no answer. His mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. "You say he is using me?" Elena continued. "Perhaps he is. But at least he was honest about the transaction. At least he told me there would be a price. You took what you wanted and offered nothing but empty words in return." She stepped around him. I know what he is, Stefan. I went to him with open eyes. I made my choice. Now let me live with it. She walked past him, up the path, into the forest. Behind her, Stefan called her name once, desperately, but she did not look back. She had looked back too many times already. She had spent 7 years looking back at memories and promises and the ghost of a love that had never been real. It was time to face forward, even if forward led into darkness. The climb seemed shorter this time, perhaps because she knew what awaited at the top, perhaps because some part of her was eager to arrive. The castle emerged from the twilight like a painting, its towers dark against the blood-red sky. The gates stood open, candles burned in the windows, a welcome she had not expected. Elena crossed the courtyard and climbed the steps to the entrance. The great doors swung open before she could knock, revealing the vast hall beyond. But this time it was not empty. A table had been set near one of the enormous fireplaces, where flames crackled and danced. 2 chairs faced each other across white linen, silver candlesticks, crystal glasses that caught the firelight. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was nothing like what she had expected. "You came," a voice said from the shadows. "I confess, I was not certain you would." Dracula stepped into the light, and Elena's breath caught. He wore black as always, but there was something different about him tonight, something less distant, less deliberately frightening. He looked almost human, if one ignored the burning eyes and the preternatural stillness of his form. "I gave my word," Elena said. "I keep my promises." A smile crossed his face, there and gone like lightning. "Yes, I'm beginning to understand that about you." He gestured to the table. "Please sit. I took the liberty of having dinner prepared." Elena approached the table slowly. 2 place settings, 2 chairs, but she noticed only 1 plate held food. The other sat empty except for a crystal goblet filled with dark red liquid that she very much did not want to contemplate. She sat. Dracula took the chair opposite, his movements fluid as water. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the candlelight, predator and prey, immortal and mortal, 2 beings who should never have found themselves sharing a meal. "You must have questions," Dracula said finally. "You have been very patient, but surely your curiosity has grown." Eleanor lifted the silver cover from her plate. Beneath lay roasted meat, vegetables glazed with honey, bread still warm from the oven. The smell was divine. Her stomach, which had been knotted with nerves all day, suddenly reminded her she had barely eaten. "Who prepared this?" she asked. "I have seen no servants. I have ways of procuring what I need." His smile was enigmatic. "When one has lived as long as I have, one learns to be resourceful." Elena took a small bite of the meat. It was perfectly cooked, seasoned with herbs she did not recognize. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you lived?" Dracula leaned back in his chair, the goblet cradled in his pale hands. "I was born in the 14th century. I was human then, a man with a name and a title and ambitions that seem laughable now." He gazed into the fire. "I became what I am in my 32nd year. That was 673 years ago. 600. Elena could not fathom such an existence. What is it like? To live so long? Tedious, mostly." The vampire's voice was flat. "You watch empires rise and fall. You see the same mistakes repeated endlessly. You learn that humans never truly change, that they are driven by the same base desires century after century. Love, greed, fear, ambition. The details change, but the story remains the same." "That sounds lonely," Eleanor said quietly. Dracula's eyes snapped to hers, something flickering in their depths. "Perceptive. Yes, it is lonely. Immortality sounds appealing to those who have not lived it. They imagine power, freedom, the ability to see and do everything. They do not imagine the weight of centuries, the slow erosion of caring about anything, the way time strips meaning from existence until you are simply enduring rather than living." Eleanor set down her fork. "Then why continue? If it is so terrible, why not end it?" The vampire was silent for a long moment. "Because," he said finally, "even a terrible existence is preferable to nothing. Because hope however faint, however foolish, refuses to die completely. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I still believe that something might change, that something might matter again. What did matter? Elena asked. Before you stopped caring, what mattered to you? Dracula's gaze returned to the fire. Love, he said simply. I had a wife, Elisabetta. She was light and warmth and everything good that I was not. She saw the darkness in me and loved me despite it, perhaps because of it. She believed I could be redeemed. What happened to her? She died, as mortals do. As you will. His voice held no emotion, but Elena sensed the vast grief beneath the words. I tried to save her. I made bargains with forces that should never be bargained with. I accepted damnation willingly if it meant I could keep her, but I was too late. She died in my arms, and I became the monster she had tried to prevent me from becoming. Elena's throat tightened. I am sorry, do not be. It was a very long time ago. Dracula drank from his goblet, and Elena looked away from the dark red liquid. Elisabetta has been dust for centuries. Her name is forgotten by everyone except me. Even her grave has crumbled to nothing. All that remains is the memory of what I destroyed trying to save it. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed the hour. Elena finished her meal in silence, processing what she had learned. The vampire sat motionless, staring into flames that cast his face in harsh shadow. Why did you agree to help me? Elena asked finally. Yesterday, in the village. You could have refused. You could have demanded my blood or my life as payment. Why did you choose to play along with my foolish plan? Dracula turned his gaze back to her. Because, he said slowly, you reminded me of her. Not in appearance. Elisabetta was nothing like you physically, but in your eyes, in your determination to face humiliation rather than hide from it, in your willingness to bargain with a monster for the sake of your pride, I saw an echo of the woman I lost. Elena's heart beat faster. An echo, a faint one, but enough to make me curious, enough to make me want to see how your little drama would play out. He smiled faintly. And I was not disappointed. You have steel in you, Elena Radovich, more than you perhaps realize. I did not feel strong. Elena looked down at her hands. I felt terrified. I felt like I would shatter at any moment. But you did not. That is what matters. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward despite fear. You did that. You faced the man who broke your heart and you did not beg. You did not crumble, you stood your ground. Because you were there, Elena said. Because I was not alone. Does that diminish your courage? Dracula leaned forward slightly. You climbed this mountain by yourself. You walked into my castle knowing what I was. You made your bargain knowing the risk. I merely provided support for a performance you orchestrated. The strength was always yours. Elena felt something warm unfold in her chest, something that might have been pride or might have been the dangerous beginning of trust. Thank you, she said softly, for saying that. I speak only truth. Lies are for those who fear consequences. I have lived too long to bother with deception. They fell into silence again, but it was different now. More comfortable. Less fraught with unspoken tension. Elena sipped wine from her crystal glass and found it rich and smooth, better than anything she had ever tasted. Dracula watched her with those burning eyes, his expression unreadable. Tell me about your family, he said eventually. Your father is ill? Yes. Elena's throat tightened. He has been sick for months. A cough that will not leave him. The village healer says his lungs are failing. She looked up at the vampire. He does not have much time. And your mother? Frightened. For him. For me. For all of us. Elena twisted the crystal stem between her fingers. My brother is young. If my father dies, I do not know how we will survive. My mother is not strong enough to work the way I do. Andrei is too small. You fear you will lose them. All of them. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Dracula was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I could help. Elena's eyes snapped to his face. What? Your father's illness? I could heal him. How? Elena leaned forward. Medicine? Some treatment the village healer does not know? Not medicine. Magic. The dark arts that made me what I am. They can heal as well as harm if applied correctly. He held up a hand as Eleanor opened her mouth. But understand, there would be a price. There is always a price. What price? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer would be terrible. Your father would live, but he would be changed. Not as I am, but not fully human either. He would be bound to me in a sense. Part of my household under my protection, owing me loyalty and service. You mean he would be your servant? Elena said flatly. I mean he would be alive. The choice is yours, Elena. Let him die slowly and painfully over the coming months, or accept my help and save him. But know that saving him means tying your family to me permanently. Elena's mind raced. Her father, healthy and whole again. Her mother no longer weeping beside his bed. Andrei with a father who could teach him and guide him. It was everything she wanted. But the cost. To be bound to a vampire. To owe eternal loyalty to a creature of darkness. To become part of the monster's household. I cannot make that decision alone, Eleanor said finally. It is not just my life that would change. It is all of theirs. I would need to ask them. To give them the choice. Fair enough. Dracula inclined his head. Think on it. Discuss it with your family. If you decide you want my help, return to me. The offer will remain open. For how long? Until your father dies or I change my mind. Whichever comes first. A hint of dark humor touched his voice. I am capricious that way. Elena should have been afraid. She should have been horrified by the casual way he discussed binding her family to his will. But instead, she felt something close to gratitude. He was offering hope where none had existed. He was offering a chance, however dark the strings attached. Why, she asked, why would you help us? Dracula stood moving to the fireplace. For a long time he stared into the flames. Then he said without looking at her, because I am tired of being alone, because this castle has been empty for too long, because watching you in the village yesterday, watching you find your courage and your voice, reminded me that I used to care about things, about people, and perhaps it is time I tried to care again. He turned to face her, and in the firelight his face looked almost human, almost vulnerable. You are not obligated to accept, he continued. You owe me nothing beyond this dinner, and that debt is now paid. You can walk away tonight and never return, and I will not stop you. But if you choose to accept my help, if you choose to bring your family under my protection, then we will be bound together, you and I. For however long you live. Elena stood slowly, her heart pounding. What would that mean, being bound to you? It would mean you could come and go from this castle as you pleased. It would mean I would protect you and yours from any who would harm you. It would mean you would have my resources at your disposal. He paused, and it would mean we would see each other frequently, perhaps daily. I do not offer protection from a distance, so I would essentially become part of your household, like Elisabetta was. Something sharp flashed in his eyes. You would be nothing like Elisabetta. Do not mistake my offer for romantic interest, child. I am not looking for a replacement for what I lost. I am looking for company, for someone to fill the silence, for a reason to care about tomorrow. Helena lifted her chin. I did not think you wanted to replace her. I simply want to understand the terms. The terms are these. I heal your father. I protect your family. You spend time with me here in the castle regularly. You provide conversation and companionship. You become a friend if such a thing is possible between a vampire and a mortal. He spread his hands. That is all I ask. For how long? Until you die. Or until you grow tired of my company and ask to be released. I am not a jailer, Elena. I am lonely. There is a difference. Elena walked to the window and looked out over the valley. Below, her village glowed with scattered lights. Somewhere down there, her father lay coughing blood into rags. Her mother wept. Her brother wondered if his sister would ever return. She could refuse. She could walk away. She could let fate take its course and find some other way to survive. But she had climbed this mountain seeking help. She had made one bargain already. Why not make another? I need to talk to my family, Eleanor said, turning back to face the vampire. If they agree, I will accept your offer. If they refuse, I will not ask again. That is reasonable. Dracula moved back to the table, refilling his goblet from a crystal decanter. You have until tomorrow night. Return then with your answer. Elena nodded. She gathered her cloak, preparing to leave, but at the doorway she paused and looked back. Count Dracula? Yes? Thank you. For the dinner. For the conversation. For treating me like a person rather than prey. His smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. You are welcome, Elena. And please, when we are alone, simply call me Dracula. The title grows tiresome after 6 centuries. Elena smiled back, surprising herself. Then good night, Dracula. Good night, little mouse. Walk carefully. The path is treacherous in the dark. She left the castle and descended the mountain under a sky full of stars. Her mind churned with everything she had learned, everything she had been offered. By the time she reached her cottage, dawn was threatening the eastern sky. Her mother sat waiting, rosary clutched in her hands. Eleanor sat beside her and began to talk, explaining everything. The offer, the price, the choice they faced. And as she spoke, Elena realized that whatever her family decided, whatever happened next, she was no longer the girl who had climbed this mountain 2 days ago. That girl was gone forever. In her place stood someone stronger, someone braver, someone willing to bargain with darkness for the sake of light. Someone who had shared dinner with a monster and found to her surprise that monsters were not always what they seemed. The conversation with her family lasted until the sun crested the eastern mountains. Her mother wept and prayed in turns. Her father, propped up on pillows, his breath rattling in his chest, listened with eyes that held both hope and fear. Andrei sat cross-legged on the floor, absorbing every word with the intensity of youth. Eleanor explained everything: the vampire's offer, the binding that would come with it, the protection and the price. She hid nothing, sugar-coated nothing. They deserved the truth, however terrible it might be. When she finished, silence filled the small cottage. Outside, the village was beginning to wake. Roosters crowed, doors opened. The day began for people who had no idea that one family among them was deciding whether to bind themselves to a creature of darkness. Her father spoke first, his voice weak but steady. I am dying. We all know this. The healer gives me weeks, perhaps a month if I am fortunate. He coughed, a sound like tearing cloth. If this creature can save me, give me more years with my family. So then the price seems fair. Fair? Elena's mother turned on him, her face pale. Nikolai, he is a vampire, a demon. We would be selling our souls. Would we? Nikolai looked at his wife with gentle eyes. From what Elena describes, he offers protection, not damnation. He asks for loyalty and companionship, not worship or sin. Is that truly so different from serving any other lord? He drinks blood, her mother whispered. He is cursed by God. Perhaps, or perhaps he is simply different, alone, lost. Nikolai reached for his wife's hand. Maria, I am terrified of dying, terrified of leaving you and our children. If there is a chance, any chance to stay with you longer, I must take it. Maria began to cry deep, racking sobs. Eleanor moved to embrace her mother, but it was Andrei who spoke next, his young voice cutting through the tension. I want to meet him, the boy said. I want to see this Count Dracula for myself before we decide. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. Andrei stood, small but determined. Eleanor went to his castle alone. Father is too sick to climb the mountain. Mother will not go. So I will go. I will look at this vampire and decide if he is truly offering help or simply laying a trap. You are 12 years old, Maria protested. I will not send my son to a monster. He helped Elena, Andrei argued. He could have hurt her and did not. He could have demanded her blood or her life, but instead he helped her embarrass Stefan in front of the whole village. That does not sound like a monster to me. That sounds like someone who might actually keep his promises. Elena felt pride swell in her chest. Her little brother, who had always been shy and quiet, was showing courage she had not known he possessed. But the thought of taking him to the castle, of exposing him to Dracula's predatory gaze, filled her with protective fear. I will ask him, Elena said carefully. If he agrees to meet you, then you may go with me tonight. But if he refuses, we will decide based on what we already know. Her family discussed it throughout the morning. Neighbors came to the door, curious about Elena's return, whispering about her appearance at the castle. Father Constantine arrived again, his aged face creased with concern. Helena told him the same story she had told before, that the vampire had shown her unexpected kindness, that she was unharmed. The priest studied her closely. "There is something different about you, child," he said quietly. "Something in your eyes. You have seen things, learned things that have changed you." Helena could not deny it. "Yes, Father." "Be careful," the old man warned. "Monsters can wear pleasant faces. They can offer gifts that seem kind but carry poison hidden within. Promise me you will pray for guidance." "I promise," Helena said, and meant it. By the time sunset approached, the decision had been made. Her father wanted to accept the vampire's offer. Her mother, though terrified, agreed that watching her husband die slowly was worse than any bargain they might make. And Andrei insisted on coming with Elena to meet the creature who would become part of their lives. Elena dressed again in the crimson gown. This time her mother helped her, fingers trembling as she fastened buttons and clasped the garnet necklace. When Elena was ready, she took her brother's hand, and together they walked through the village toward the mountain. People stared openly now. Some made warding signs. Others simply watched with expressions that mixed pity and fear and something like fascination. Eleanor held her head high and kept walking, her brother's small hand warm in hers. The climb was harder with Andrei. His legs were shorter, his endurance less. They had to stop several times to rest. But the boy never complained, never asked to turn back. He climbed with determination, his eyes fixed on the castle that grew larger with each step. When they finally reached the gates, Andrei gasped. "It is real," he breathed. "I thought maybe you were making it up or remembering wrong, but it is real." The gates swung open as before. Elena led her brother across the courtyard, up the steps through the massive doors. The entrance hall blazed with candlelight tonight, as though the castle itself was welcoming them. Dracula stood at the center of the hall, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes went immediately to Andrei, and Elena felt her protective instincts surge. She stepped slightly in front of her brother. "You brought a guest," the vampire observed. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "My brother," Elena said. "Andrei, he wanted to meet you before my family makes a final decision." Dracula's gaze settled on the boy, and Elena saw Andrei straighten under that crimson scrutiny, refusing to cower. "Brave," the vampire said softly, "or foolish, perhaps both." He moved closer, and Elena resisted the urge to pull her brother back. "You are not afraid, child." Andrei's voice shook slightly but held firm. "I am afraid, but my father is dying, and my sister says you might be able to save him. So I needed to see you, to know if you are a monster who would hurt us or something else." "Something else?" Dracula's lips curved in a faint smile. "And what is your conclusion?" Andrei studied the vampire's face with an intensity beyond his years. "I do not know yet. Elena says you helped her, that you kept your word and did not harm her, that you treated her with respect." "All true," Dracula confirmed, "but you are still a vampire. You drink blood. You have killed people." "Also true, I am not a good creature, Andrei. I am old and I am damned, and I have done terrible things over the centuries." He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's level, and Elena's hand moved instinctively to her brother's shoulder. "But I am offering your family something genuine. Protection. Healing. A chance at a better life. The price is loyalty and companionship, nothing more sinister." "Why?" Andrei asked. "Why would you help us?" "Because your sister intrigues me. Because this castle is too quiet. Because after 600 years of isolation, I find I am tired of being alone." Dracula's voice was steady, honest. "I will not lie to you, boy. I am dangerous. I am capable of great cruelty. But I keep my word once given, and I am offering your father life when he has only death awaiting him." Andrei looked up at Elena. "What do you think? Do you trust him?" Elena met Dracula's burning gaze. "I think he is exactly what he claims to be. A monster who might also be capable of kindness. A creature who has lived so long, he values honesty over pretty lies." She paused. "Yes, I trust him to keep his word." Dracula stood slowly, something like respect flickering in his expression. Then it seems the decision is made. Shall I come tonight to heal your father, or would you prefer to bring him here? He cannot climb the mountain, Elena said. He can barely leave his bed. Then I will come to your cottage. At midnight, when the village sleeps. I prefer not to cause more hysteria than necessary. Elena nodded. We will be ready. Dracula turned to Andrei. You have courage, boy. That will serve you well in the years to come. He extended his hand, palm up. Do we have an accord? Your family accepts my protection, and in exchange, you offer loyalty and companionship? Andrei looked at the pale hand, then at his sister. Elena nodded. The boy reached out and placed his small hand in the vampire's. We accept. A sensation filled the hall, like the air before a lightning strike. Elena felt something shift, some invisible thread weaving between her family and this ancient creature. The bargain was sealed, the binding was made. Dracula released Andrei's hand and stepped back. It is done. I will come to your cottage at midnight. Have your father prepared. The process will not be pleasant, but it will be effective. What will happen to him? Eleanor asked. You said he would be changed. How? He will be stronger than a normal man. He will heal faster. He will live longer, barring accident or violence. Dracula's expression was serious. But he will also be bound to me. He will feel my presence like a weight at the edge of his awareness. If I call him, he will be compelled to answer. If I am in danger, he will feel it. The connection goes both ways. Will he become like you? Andrei asked. Will he need to drink blood? No. He will remain human in most respects. He will still eat, sleep, age. Just more slowly. Dracula moved toward the door. Now go. Prepare your parents. Tell them what to expect. And Elena? Yes? I will need you to be present. The ritual requires someone who has already accepted the binding. You will serve as the anchor point. Helena's throat tightened. What do I need to do? Simply be there. Hold your father's hand. Let the connection flow through you. Dracula's smile was almost gentle. It will not hurt you. I promise. They left the castle and descended the mountain in silence. Andrei held tightly to Elena's hand, his mind clearly racing with everything he had seen and heard. When they were halfway down, he spoke. He is lonely, the boy said quietly. Did you see it? The way he looked at us. He wants a family. Elena had seen it, had felt it in the vampire's voice, in the careful way he had spoken to Andrei, in the genuine interest behind his questions. Yes, she agreed. I think you are right. Is that bad? To want to not be alone? No, Eleanor said softly. That is not bad. That is human, or what remains of human in him. They reached the cottage to find their mother praying, and their father sleeping fitfully. Eleanor explained what had happened, what Dracula had said, what would occur at midnight. Maria listened with a face like stone, then nodded once, accepting the inevitable. The hours until midnight crawled past. Elena tried to rest but could not. She paced the small cottage, checked on her father repeatedly, reassured her mother when the older woman's composure cracked. Andrei sat at the table, drawing pictures of the castle with a stub of charcoal, processing what he had witnessed in the only way he knew how. When the clock in the village square told midnight, a knock came at the cottage door. Elena opened it to find Dracula standing in the darkness, a leather bag in his hand. He wore simple black, nothing decorative, and his face was set in lines of concentration. Is he ready? The vampire asked without preamble. Elena led him inside. Her father lay on the bed, his breathing labored. Maria sat beside him, clutching his hand. Andrei stood in the corner, watching everything with wide eyes. Dracula approached the bed and knelt beside it. He opened the leather bag and removed several items, a silver knife, a crystal vial filled with dark liquid, a strip of white cloth, and a small wooden box carved with symbols Elena did not recognize. This will hurt, the vampire said to Nikolai. I will not lie about that, but you must stay conscious throughout. If you lose awareness, the ritual will fail, and you will die. Nikolai nodded weakly. I understand. Dracula looked at Elena. Come, stand here beside me. Place your hand on your father's shoulder. Elena moved to obey, her heart hammering. Up close, she could smell the strange scent that always surrounded the vampire. Old stone and older blood and something underneath that might have been rosemary or might have been something more exotic. The vampire opened the wooden box. Inside lay a substance that looked like ash mixed with crushed herbs. He began to speak in a language Elena did not know, words that were harsh and guttural and seemed to make the air itself vibrate. He sprinkled the ash mixture over Nikolai's chest in a careful pattern. Then he opened the crystal vial and poured a single drop of the dark liquid onto each of the ash markings. Where the liquid touched, the ash began to glow with a faint red light. Elena's father gasped, his back arching off the bed. Maria cried out, but Dracula's voice cut through her panic. "Do not break the circle. Do not interfere. Let the magic work." Dracula picked up the silver knife. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need your blood. Just a few drops. Are you willing?" Elena swallowed hard and extended her hand. The vampire made a swift, precise cut across her palm. Pain flared sharp and bright. Blood welled up, dark red in the candlelight. Dracula caught several drops in his palm, then pressed his hand to Nikolai's forehead. The instant vampire blood and mortal blood mixed on the dying man's skin, everything changed. Light exploded through the cottage, red and blinding. Nikolai screamed, a sound of agony that tore at Elena's heart. She wanted to pull away, wanted to stop this, but Dracula's hand clamped around her wrist, holding her in place. "Do not break the connection," he commanded. "Your father needs you. Be his anchor. Be his reason to hold on." Elena squeezed her father's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with us, Papa," she pleaded. "Do not leave us. Hold on, just hold on." The light grew brighter, more intense. The symbols drawn in ash and blood burned like brands on Nikolai's chest. The cottage filled with the smell of ozone and burning herbs. Andrei pressed himself against the wall, his young face pale with shock. Maria sobbed, still clutching her husband's hand, refusing to let go. Dracula's voice rose, the strange words coming faster now, building to some kind of crescendo. The light pulsed in time with Nikolai's heartbeat, each pulse stronger than the last. Elena felt something flowing through her, from the vampire through her and into her father, a dark and ancient power that both terrified and awed her. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the light vanished. The symbols faded. The cottage fell into sudden, shocking silence. Nikolai lay still on the bed, his chest rising and falling with steady, strong breaths. The terrible rattle was gone. His face, which had been waxen and hollow, now held color. His hands, which had been skeletal and trembling, now looked solid and strong. Dracula released Elena's wrist and sat back on his heels. "It is done," he said quietly. "He will sleep now. When he wakes, he will be changed." Maria threw herself across her husband's body, weeping with relief and residual terror. Andrei ran to the bed, taking his father's hand, feeling the strong pulse that beat beneath the skin. Elena looked at the vampire, who was carefully returning his tools to the leather bag. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Dracula stood, and for just a moment his expression softened. "You are welcome." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I will return tomorrow evening. We should discuss what comes next, now that your family is bound to mine." "What comes next?" Elena followed him to the door. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your father will need guidance. He will have questions, experience changes he does not understand. I will need to teach him how to manage his new abilities. And you," he turned to look at her, "you will need to keep your part of the bargain. Companionship, conversation, time spent at the castle." Elena nodded. "I remember. I will come." "Good." Dracula stepped out into the night, then looked back one final time. "Sleep well, Elena. Tomorrow your new life truly begins." He vanished into the darkness, moving so quickly and quietly that within heartbeats it was as though he had never been there at all. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, her body trembling with exhaustion and reaction. Her mother was still crying over her father, but they were tears of joy now. Andrei stood beside the bed, his face filled with wonder. And Nikolai slept peacefully, his breathing steady, his color healthy, death banished by dark magic and an ancient creature's power. Elena looked at her palm, where the vampire's knife had cut her. The wound had already stopped bleeding, was already beginning to close. Tomorrow, there would barely be a scar. Tomorrow she would return to the castle. Tomorrow she would begin whatever life awaited her as companion to a vampire. Tomorrow everything would be different. But tonight her father lived. Tonight her family was whole. Tonight, for the first time in months, there was hope. Eleanor moved to her narrow bed and lay down fully clothed. Through the thin wall she could hear her mother's quiet prayers of gratitude. She could hear Andre's soft breathing as he fell asleep in his corner. And she could hear her father's strong, steady heartbeat, a sound she had thought she would never hear again. Outside, the night deepened. The village slept, unaware that one of their own had been transformed, that a bargain had been sealed, that the line between their world and the vampires had grown thinner. And high in his castle, Dracula stood at his window and looked down at the cottage, where a family slept under his protection. A smile crossed his face, genuine and warm, an expression that had not graced his features in decades. He had forgotten what it felt like to care about mortals, had forgotten the satisfaction of saving a life rather than taking one, had forgotten that power could be used for something other than fear and domination. Elena had reminded him. This brave, foolish girl who had climbed his mountain twice now, who had looked at him without flinching, who had trusted him enough to bring her brother into his presence. Tomorrow she would return. Tomorrow they would begin the next phase of their strange arrangement. And Dracula found himself looking forward to it with an anticipation he had not felt in centuries. Perhaps, he thought, this was what redemption looked like. Not a sudden transformation from darkness to light, but small steps, small choices, small acts of mercy that gradually accumulated until they became something more. Perhaps Elisabetta had been right all those centuries ago. Perhaps he could change. Perhaps he could become something more than the monster the world believed him to be. Or perhaps he was simply lonely, and Elena was simply desperate, and together they had formed a connection that would benefit neither of them in the end. Time would tell, and Dracula had nothing but time. He turned from the window and moved deeper into his castle, into rooms that had stood empty for too long. Tomorrow he would prepare spaces for visitors. Tomorrow he would make his home slightly less forbidding, slightly more welcoming. Tomorrow he would try, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to be something other than the nightmare in the dark. The hours passed, dawn approached, and in the village below, as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose, Nikolai Radovich opened his eyes for the first time since the ritual. He sat up in bed, movement strong and sure, no longer labored or painful. Maria woke with a start, staring at her husband as though seeing a ghost. Nikolai looked at his hands, flexing fingers that no longer trembled, taking a breath that filled his lungs completely without triggering the terrible cough. "I feel," he said wonderingly, "like I am 20 years old again." Elena woke to her mother's cry of joy, to her brother's excited shout, to her father standing beside the bed, whole and healthy and alive. She rose and embraced him, feeling the strength in his arms, the steadiness of his stance. "The vampire kept his word," Nikolai said softly into Elena's hair. "He gave me life. He gave us hope." "Yes," Elena agreed, holding tight to her father. "He did." "Then we will keep ours," Nikolai said firmly. "We will honor the bargain. We will be loyal to the one who saved us." Elena nodded against her father's chest, and somehow, despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty, and the knowledge that their lives would never be normal again, she felt at peace with that decision. They had made their choice. They had accepted the vampire's help, and now they would face whatever consequences came with courage and determination, together, as a family, under the protection of a creature who had lived 600 years alone and was finally, tentatively, allowing himself to hope for something more than endless isolation. The sun rose higher, the village woke, and in one small cottage on the edge of town, a family that had been dying was given new life through ancient magic and impossible mercy. The game had changed, the players had shifted, and the next chapter of this strange story was about to begin. The transformation of Nikolai Radovich became the talk of the village within days. The man who had been dying, who could barely walk from his bed to his chair, was now working in the fields with the strength of someone half his age. Color had returned to his face. His cough had vanished completely. He moved with an energy that bordered on unnatural. People whispered. They speculated. They knew the vampire was responsible, and that knowledge created a divide in the village. Some families, desperate with their own illnesses and troubles, began to look toward the mountain with new eyes. Others, led by a few of the more superstitious elders, spoke of curses and damnation and the price of dealing with demons. Elena felt the weight of their stares every time she walked through the village, but she no longer cared what they thought. Her father was alive. Her family was whole, and she had a promise to keep. True to her word, Elena returned to the castle the evening after her father's healing. She climbed the mountain path with steady steps, no longer afraid, no longer uncertain. The gates opened at her approach, the doors swung wide, and Dracula waited for her in the entrance hall, a faint smile on his lips. "You came," he said, as though there had been any doubt. "I always keep my promises," Elena replied. "So I am learning." He gestured toward one of the corridors. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her through the castle, and Elena realized he was taking her to places she had not seen before. A library that stretched 3 stories high, filled with more books than she had known existed. A conservatory where moonlight streamed through glass panels, illuminating gardens that somehow thrived despite the absence of sun. A music room with instruments from a dozen different centuries, each perfectly maintained, though none had been played in years. "This was my home once," Dracula said as they walked. "Not just a fortress or a lair, but a place where people lived and loved and created beauty." He stopped in the music room, his hand resting on a harpsichord. Elisabetta used to play. She would fill these halls with music. He smiled at the memory, sad and sweet. "I have not heard music here in 300 years. Would you like to?" Elena asked quietly. Dracula looked at her, surprised. "You play?" "A little. The village priest taught me when I was young. Nothing as fine as what your wife must have known, but I can manage simple melodies, then play." His voice held something like hunger. "Please." Elena sat at the harpsichord, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the keys. The instrument was perfectly tuned despite its age, the ivory smooth under her hands. She played a folk song from her childhood, simple and sweet, a tune her mother had sung to her when she was small. The music filled the room, filled the castle, broke the silence that had reigned for centuries. Elena played with her eyes closed, letting muscle memory guide her fingers, pouring emotion into the notes. When she finished, silence fell again, but it was a different kind of silence. Softer, gentler. She opened her eyes to find Dracula standing with his back to her, his shoulders tense. For a long moment he did not move. Then he turned, and she saw his eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Again," he said hoarsely. "Play again." So she did. She played every song she knew, and when she ran out of those, she improvised, letting the music flow through her fingers without thought or plan. And Dracula stood in his music room and listened as beauty returned to his home for the first time in longer than he could remember. When her fingers finally grew tired and she lifted them from the keys, he spoke. "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of genuine gratitude. From that night forward, Eleanor's visits became routine. She came to the castle every evening as the sun set. Sometimes they talked, long conversations that ranged from philosophy to history to the mundane details of village life. Sometimes she played music while he listened. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, reading in the library or walking through the castle gardens. Elena brought her family with her occasionally. Nikolai came to learn about his new abilities, spending hours with Dracula discussing the changes in his body. The way time seemed to move differently for him now. The strange awareness he had of the vampire's presence at the edge of his mind. Andrei came to explore the castle's many rooms, to hear stories of centuries past, to satisfy his endless curiosity about the world beyond their small village. Even Maria came once, though she remained uncomfortable in the vampire's presence. She thanked him stiffly for saving her husband, then retreated to a corner and prayed quietly until it was time to leave. Dracula treated her with careful courtesy, never pressing, never demanding she feel anything other than what she felt. Weeks passed. The autumn deepened into winter. Snow fell on the mountains, covering the path between village and castle in white. But Elena climbed it anyway, wrapped in the fur-lined cloak Dracula had given her, determined to keep her promise. The village's attitude toward her family slowly shifted. Fear remained, but it was mixed now with a grudging respect. Nikolai's recovery had been impossible to deny, and several other families, seeing his transformation, began to approach Elena with tentative questions. Could the Count help their loved ones too? What would be the price? How dangerous was the bargain? Elena referred them all to Dracula, refusing to make promises on his behalf. Some climbed the mountain, some returned healed, their families bound to the vampire just as Elena's was. Others never made the climb, too afraid or too proud to ask a monster for help. One evening, as Elena sat with Dracula in the library, she asked him something that had been troubling her. Why do you help them? You could refuse, you could demand terrible prices, but you heal them and ask only for loyalty and occasionally for someone to keep you company. Why? Dracula set down the book he had been reading and looked at her for a long moment. Because you showed me something I had forgotten, he said finally. You showed me that mercy can be its own reward, that small acts of kindness, even from a creature like me, can change lives, perhaps even change the one offering the kindness. You were not always kind, Elena said. It was not a question. No, for centuries I was everything the legends claim. Cruel, vicious, taking what I wanted without thought or mercy. He stared into the fire that crackled in the library's hearth. I killed thousands. I terrorized entire regions. I became the nightmare parents used to frighten children, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no connection to the lives I destroyed. What changed? You, he said simply. You climbed my mountain with your desperate bargain and your wounded pride. And you reminded me that I used to be human, that I used to care about things like love and loyalty and honor. You were so determined to salvage your dignity, so willing to risk everything for 5 minutes of pretense, that I could not help but admire you. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I was being foolish, petty. You were being human. Dracula smiled faintly, and that humanity was contagious. It reminded me of Elisabetta, of the man I had been before I lost her. It made me wonder if perhaps I could be that man again, even in this cursed form. Can you? Elena asked quietly. Can you truly change after 600 years? I do not know, but I am trying. He gestured around the library at the castle beyond. I am helping rather than harming. I am building connections rather than severing them. I am trying to be something other than the monster. Whether I succeed or fail remains to be seen. They fell into silence, the fire crackling between them. Elena thought about the man who sat across from her, this creature of legend and nightmare who had shown her more honest kindness than many humans in her life, who had saved her father, who had protected her family, who spent his evenings talking with her about philosophy and history because he was lonely, and she was willing to listen. When spring came, the village held its annual festival. Elena had not planned to attend, expecting the usual mixture of stares and whispers, but her father insisted, and her mother agreed that hiding would only make things worse. So Elena dressed in a simple gown and walked with her family into the village square, where tables had been set up and musicians played and people danced under the afternoon sun. She was standing near the food tables when Stefan appeared at her elbow. She had not seen him since that morning in the square months ago. He looked thinner now, hollowed out, as though something vital had been carved from his center. "Elena," he said quietly, "may I speak with you?" Elena glanced at her father, who nodded permission. She followed Stefan to a quiet corner of the square, away from the crowds and music. "I am leaving," Stefan said without preamble, "returning to the capital. There is nothing for me here anymore." "I am sorry," Elena said, and meant it. Not sorry that he was leaving, but sorry for the pain in his eyes, for the regret that hung around him like a cloak. Are you? He looked at her searchingly. You have found something here. Something I threw away. Your vampire treats you better than I ever did. He is not my vampire, Elena said firmly. We are friends, nothing more. Stefan laughed bitterly. Friends, with a creature who drinks blood and has lived for centuries. Do you hear how mad that sounds? It would have sounded mad to me once, Elena admitted. But I have learned that the world is stranger and more complex than I imagined. That monsters can choose to be kind and humans can choose to be cruel. That appearances mean less than actions. I was cruel to you, Stefan said quietly. I made promises I did not keep. I hurt you deeply. I know that now. I have known it for months. He met her eyes. Can you forgive me? Elena thought about the girl she had been, the one who had waited 7 years for this man's return. That girl would have wept to hear these words, would have welcomed his apology and perhaps even offered him another chance. But that girl was gone. In her place stood someone who had bargained with vampires, who had walked through fire to protect her family, who had learned that her worth was not determined by whether faithless men chose to love her. I can forgive you, Elena said gently, but I cannot forget. And I do not wish to revisit what we had. That part of my life is over. Stefan nodded slowly, accepting the finality in her words. He is lucky, you know. Your vampire. To have someone like you caring about him. I think we are both lucky, Elena replied. We found each other when we each needed someone most. Stefan turned to leave, then paused. Be careful, Elena. No matter how kind he seems, he is still a predator, still dangerous. Do not forget that. I never forget what he is, Elena said. But I also do not forget what he has done, the lives he has saved, the mercy he has shown. She lifted her chin. Perhaps you should consider doing the same, judging people by their actions rather than what you assume they are. Stefan had no answer to that. He walked away across the square toward the road that would take him back to the capital, back to whatever life awaited him there. Elena watched him go and felt only a distant sadness for what might have been if he had been a different man. She returned to her family and enjoyed the festival. She danced with her father, who moved with the grace and strength of youth. She laughed with Andrei, who had grown taller over the winter. She even coaxed a smile from her mother, who was gradually accepting their strange new life. That evening, as always, Elena climbed the mountain to the castle. She found Dracula waiting in the music room, and she played for him as the sun set and the stars emerged. When she finished, he asked her to walk with him in the gardens. They strolled among the moonlit flowers, their breath misting in the cool night air. You seem content tonight, Dracula observed. I am, Elena agreed. Stefan came to say goodbye today. He is leaving the village. And how did that make you feel? Relieved, mostly. Elena smiled slightly. A few months ago, seeing him leave would have destroyed me. But now I feel only glad that he will find his path, and I will continue on mine. Your path has become strange indeed, Dracula said. Spending your evenings with a vampire, bringing your family into my world, becoming something that exists between the mortal realm and my darkness. Do you regret it? Elena asked. Binding us to you? No. Dracula stopped walking and turned to face her. You have given me something I thought I had lost forever. Purpose, connection, a reason to care about tomorrow. He reached out and took her hand, his touch cold as always, but somehow comforting. I do not regret it, but I wonder if you do. Elena looked down at their joined hands, mortal warmth and immortal cold. I do not regret it either. You saved my father. You protected my family. You have been kinder to me than many humans I have known. She met his burning gaze. You have become my friend, Dracula, and I do not regret that. Something shifted in his expression, some wall crumbling that had stood for centuries. Friend, he repeated softly as though testing the word. I have not had a friend in longer than I can remember. Then it is time you had one again. They stood in the moonlit garden, vampire and mortal, predator and prey, two beings who should never have formed a connection but somehow had. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead, the castle looming behind them like a watchful guardian. I will make you a promise, Dracula said quietly. For as long as you live, I will protect you and yours. I will never harm you. I will never betray your trust. And when your time comes, when mortality finally claims you as it must, I will mourn you as I mourned Elisabetta. You have my word." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. It is simply the truth." He released her hand and stepped back, his expression once again controlled, the momentary vulnerability hidden away. "Now come. It grows late, and you should return home before your mother begins to worry." They walked back through the castle together. At the great doors, Elena paused. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow." Dracula confirmed, as always. Elena descended the mountain through the darkness, the path familiar now, no longer frightening. Below, the village glowed with scattered lights. Her home waited there, warm and welcoming, her family safe within it. But part of her heart remained in the castle behind her, with the lonely creature who had chosen mercy over cruelty, who had saved her family and asked for nothing but companionship in return. The months turned into years. Elena continued her nightly visits to the castle. She grew from a girl into a woman, her confidence increasing, her understanding of the world deepening. Dracula became not just her friend but her teacher, sharing centuries of accumulated knowledge, showing her wonders from his vast collection of books and artifacts. Andrei grew into a young man, often accompanying his sister to the castle, absorbing everything the vampire could teach him. Nikolai remained strong and healthy, aging so slowly that people began to whisper about him too. Maria never grew comfortable with their patron, but she accepted him, recognizing that her family's prosperity came from his protection. Other families joined theirs, creating a small community bound to the vampire lord. They did not worship him, did not serve him as slaves, but they were loyal to him. They protected his secrets. They defended him against the accusations that occasionally arose, and in return, he watched over them with ancient power and unexpected gentleness. The village itself changed. Where once it had been poor and struggling, it now prospered. Those under Dracula's protection worked harder, lived longer, thrived in ways that seemed impossible. Trade increased. New families arrived. The village grew into a town, and the town began to have a reputation. A strange reputation. Certainly, but not an entirely negative one. And through it all Elena climbed the mountain path, through summer heat and winter snow, through rain and fog and brilliant starlit nights. She came to the castle and brought life and warmth and humanity into its ancient halls. 10 years passed. Elena was no longer a girl of 19, but a woman of 29. She had refused several marriage proposals from young men in the village, content with her life as it was. Her father, who should have been approaching 60, looked barely 40. Andrei had become a scholar, spending more time in Dracula's library than in the village. Maria had grown accustomed to their strange existence, even finding a kind of peace in it. One winter evening, Elena sat with Dracula in the library, both of them reading by firelight. Snow fell outside, heavy and silent. The castle was warm, peaceful, a sanctuary from the cold world beyond. Dracula set down his book and looked at her. "You know you are aging," he said quietly. Elena smiled slightly. "Yes, I am mortal. That is how it works. When I bound your father to me, I slowed his aging considerably. He will live perhaps twice as long as a normal man, possibly longer." He watched her face carefully. "I could do the same for you." Elena's hands stilled on the pages of her book. "You have never offered before. I was waiting to see if you would ask. You never did." He leaned forward slightly. "Why, Elena? Why have you never asked me to extend your life the way I extended your father's?" "Because," Elena said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "I am not afraid of death. I know it will come someday. I have accepted that." She met his burning gaze. "But if you are offering, if you truly wish to give me more time, then yes, I would accept." "Why?" Now it was his turn to ask. "What has changed?" Elena closed her book and set it aside. "Because I have found something worth living for. This. Us. The conversations we share. The music we make together. The life we have built in this strange space between your world and mine." She smiled. "I would like more time for that. As much time as you are willing to give." Dracula stood and moved to stand before her. He extended his hand, palm up. "It will bind you to me even more tightly than you already are. You will feel my presence constantly. You will age even more slowly than your father. You will become something between mortal and immortal, never fully one or the other." "I understand," Elena said, placing her hand in his. "Then so be it." The ritual was simpler this time. No elaborate preparations, no dramatic magic. Simply his blood mixed with hers, his power flowing into her body, changing her on a fundamental level. She felt it settle into her bones, felt time's grip on her loosen, felt the connection between them strengthen until it was almost tangible. When it was done, Elena felt different, stronger, more aware. She could sense Dracula now, could feel his presence like a second heartbeat at the edge of her consciousness. It should have been frightening. Instead, it felt right, like finding a piece of herself she had not known was missing. "How do you feel?" Dracula asked. "Like I could live forever," Elena replied. Then she laughed. "Or at least a very long time. Not forever. Even with my blood, you will age. You will die eventually. But it will be centuries rather than decades." "Centuries with you," Elena said softly. "That does not sound like a curse to me." "No." A smile played at his lips. "Most would consider eternal companionship with a vampire to be damnation. Then most do not know you as I do." Elena stood, and they were very close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of deeper crimson in his eyes, could feel the cold that radiated from his skin. "You are not damnation, Dracula. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, carefully, Dracula lifted his hand and touched her face. His fingers were cold against her warm skin, gentle in a way that contrasted sharply with the predatory power she knew he possessed. "I did not think I could care for anyone again after Elisabetta," he said quietly. "I thought that part of me had died with her. But you have proven me wrong. You have become precious to me, Elena. More precious than I have words to express." "Then do not try to express it," Elena whispered. "Simply know that the feeling is returned." They stood together in the firelight, vampire and mortal no longer, but something new, something that had no name because it had never existed before, a bond forged through time and trust, and the gradual erosion of all the walls they had both built around their hearts. The years continued to pass, but more slowly now for Elena. She watched her brother grow into a brilliant scholar. She watched her mother grow old gracefully and pass peacefully in her sleep at 83. She watched her father continue to thrive, bound to the vampire as she now was, aging so slowly that decades looked like years. The town prospered under Dracula's subtle protection. The families bound to him formed the core of a community that valued loyalty, education, and the strange balance between mortal concerns and immortal oversight. Travelers spoke of the town in the shadow of the haunted mountain, where people lived longer and prospered more than seemed natural. And every evening as the sun set, Elena climbed the mountain path to the castle, sometimes alone, sometimes with her family, sometimes with others who had business with the vampire lord. She played music in his music room, she read in his library, she walked in his gardens. She filled the ancient halls with laughter and life and the warmth of genuine affection. Dracula, for his part, changed more than he would have thought possible. The casual cruelty that had defined him for centuries faded away. He became known, at least among those bound to him, as a fair master, demanding but just, powerful but merciful, strange but trustworthy. He taught André everything the young man wanted to know, creating a scholar who would eventually become renowned throughout the region. He helped expand the town, using his considerable resources to fund improvements and attract trade. He protected his people from bandits and disease and the various threats that plagued medieval existence. And he spent his evenings with Elena, talking and laughing and slowly, gradually, learning to be something other than alone. 20 years after Elena first climbed the mountain, she stood again in the music room and played the harpsichord while Dracula listened. But this time, when she finished, he rose and moved to stand behind her. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, cold and steady. "I love you," he said quietly. "Not as I loved Elisabetta. That was the love of a man for his wife, passionate and all-consuming and ultimately destructive. This is different, quieter, deeper, more enduring. You have become essential to my existence, Elena. I wanted you to know that." Elena covered his hands with her own. "I love you too. You are my dearest friend, my protector, the one person in all the world who truly knows me and accepts me completely." "Is that enough?" Dracula asked. "Friendship and affection? Or do you wish for more?" Elena turned on the bench to face him. "What more could there be? We already have everything that matters. Trust, loyalty, companionship. What else is needed? I do not know." Dracula's smile was uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I am 600 years old and I do not know. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps we have found something that needs no name, no label, no conventional understanding." "Then let it remain nameless," Elena said. "Let it simply be what it is, whatever that may be." And so it was. The years continued, and Elena and Dracula existed in their strange liminal space, neither fully mortal nor fully immortal, neither master and servant nor equals, but something unique that had grown from desperate circumstances into genuine devotion. When Elena was 50 years old, she looked 30. When she was 70, she looked 40. Time's grip on her had loosened to the point that she could expect to live 200 or 300 years, perhaps more if she chose to undergo the ritual again, when age finally began to catch up to her. She watched the world change around her, watched the town grow into a small city, watched technology advance, watched generations come and go. And through it all, the castle on the mountain remained constant. The vampire within remained constant, and Elena climbed the path between them, bridging the gap between mortal and immortal, bringing light into darkness, proving that even the damned could find redemption through unexpected connection. On a spring evening, 100 years after Elena first climbed the mountain seeking help with her petty heartbreak, she stood with Dracula on the castle battlements and looked out over the valley. The city below glowed with electric lights now, a modern world that would have been incomprehensible to the girl she had once been. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "That day I came to you with my foolish request." "Never," Dracula said without hesitation. "That day changed everything. It gave me back my humanity, it gave me purpose, it gave me you, even knowing how strange our existence would become, how long this would last, especially knowing that." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw centuries of loneliness finally healed. "You are the best thing that has happened to me in 600 years, Elena. I regret nothing." Elena smiled and took his hand, warm flesh and cold stone, mortal and immortal, two beings who should never have fit together, but somehow created something beautiful from their impossible connection. "Nor do I," she said, "nor do I." They stood together on the battlements as night deepened around them. Below, the city lived and breathed and continued its endless cycle. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And between earth and sky, in a castle that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more, a vampire and the woman who had saved him from his own darkness found peace in each other's presence. The story that had begun with a desperate bargain and 5 minutes of pretended love had become something far greater, something real, something that transcended the boundaries between life and death, mortal and immortal, darkness and light. And as the moon rose over the Carpathian mountains, casting silver light across the ancient stones, Elena and Dracula remained together, neither fully one thing nor another, but something new and precious that the world had never seen before. A friendship that had become love, a love that defied definition, a bond that would endure as long as either of them drew breath, mortal or otherwise. And in that moment, standing beneath the stars with centuries still ahead of them, both of them knew with absolute certainty that the bargain struck so long ago had been worth every price paid, every sacrifice made, every fear overcome. Because some connections transcend logic, Some bonds defy explanation, and some loves, however strange their origin, however unconventional their expression, are meant to last beyond the brief span of a single human lifetime. This was such a love, and it would endure, as all true things endure, until time itself ran out and the stars fell from the sky. Forever, or as close to forever as mortals and immortals alike could hope to achieve.